Let us enter the arena. Welcome to MidPoint, the chancellor at Patrick Henry College, a constitutional lawyer and a harsh critic of the Centers for Disease Control, Michael Farris, and the news director for the Tea Party News Network, an old friend, Scottie Nell Hughes. Thank you so much for joining us, both of you.
Thank you.
Well, I'll tell you what, Mike, I'm going to start with you right here because you have been a critic of the CDC. Why has it taken so long for the world, I guess, not just the CDC, but the WHO and so many others to recognize this for what it is, really a dangerous outbreak?
I don't know the Ebola crisis in particular, but I know the CDC. I've worked with them in the area of Lyme disease. I was the chairman of the governor's task force on Lyme disease in Virginia. And their attitude on Lyme disease, which is infecting countless thousands of people, is really head in the sand. And the CDC in that area is not only not a part of the solution, they're actually a part of the problem. They're getting in the way of innovation. They're getting in the way of new testing, new studies, and so on. And they are very slow to act. So I think that government needs to change its attitude and ideas about handle these kinds of medical emergencies, and the slow, cumbersome methodology the CDC uses today simply doesn't work.
When you say getting in the way of intervention, can you give us some specifics?
Well, in the Lyme disease area, they've basically decided we know everything that there is to know about it, and refuse to undertake meaningful new studies by people who are actually treating people with Lyme disease. And so the same thing could be true in the Ebola crisis, that they need to be interacting with people who are actually on the field, who are dealing with this, deal with it daily, and not just medical researchers someplace off in an ivory tower. That kind of an attitude has permeated in this one area, and I'm suspicious, but I don't know the details, that it could permeate the other activity as well.
Scottie Nell, let me bring you in here right now. The House Foreign Affairs Committee held hearings on the Ebola threat. 3 lawmakers, 3, put their recess on hold to attend what was an emergency meeting on this Ebola outbreak. It sure seems to a lot of people that 3 people showing up says that maybe our government and the people who are in charge of watching our government just don't seem to care about this. It's not that big a deal.
Well, let me just say this. You know, I am one of those the glass is half full kind of people. Sorry that I'm not buying into this panic that this is a global crisis yet. 932 cases of this, maybe 1,500 more they're saying. I don't think it's worth all this craziness. And honestly, if more of these congressional people had shown up at this hearing, I would have been actually shocked and very disappointed, because of all the crises that we have going on within the United States today, this would be the last one that I would put that they need to be showing up and coming out of vacation for. When we have our borders as open as literally a wide open border going on, when we have literally everything going on with our budget, we have other crises that I would say would be more panicky than necessarily Ebola in a country that is known for bringing a different disease over almost every few months.
All right, well, I'm going to agree with you on one thing here, because I've said, and many people have said on the show before, that panic is not the way to go. But are we really underlooking, and are you sort of overlooking this? Because let's face it, I understand that there's only so many people, but this is a disease for which there is no cure at this point, and it kills. So shouldn't the people here in this country, at least if there is an emergency session called, be there to discuss it and make sure that every step is being taken to protect the American people?
Well, I think, honestly, this shows how slow the news is right now, because when you sit there and you have a packed room like we had yesterday with this committee, and only 3 congressional people show up, but it's packed with media, it looks like they're looking for a story. They need something to drive these ratings this August, with the primaries being over. But, you know, to be honest with you, every day more than 1,500 people die of cancer here in the United States alone. 1,500. That's a crisis to me. So if you want to call people back to work, you know, we're going to talk about an emergency health crisis. Let's talk about cancer. Let's talk about other things. This right now is not at that level. I think that they will be able to contain it. They should. And if not, then let's sit there and call on this pandemonium and call these emergency meetings. But at this point, we've got a lot of other issues we need to be dealing with
But
first.
there is treatment for cancer, Scottie Nell. There is continuing research on cancer, and it would seem as if there is nothing right now that they can do for Ebola.
Well, and hence why they're trying out this new medication. So let's keep on, let's sit there and keep trying these out. Doesn't mean necessarily calling it an emergency. And let me just ask this question. When was the last time Washington, D.C. solved anything by calling a congressional hearing or congressional committee? This is the last person. Maybe we need to call a bunch of doctors in, but I would never call my congressman necessarily to find a cure for this problem.
Michael, let me get to you on this. Do you agree?
Well, I don't agree on one basic thing, is the Center for Disease Control isn't in charge of the immigration problem. to say that the CDC can't deal with the Ebola crisis because the borders are bad, which the borders are bad. I mean, I agree we need to take care of our border situation, but we have different functions of government, and different congressmen are in charge of making sure that the government's doing the right thing. And so the question is the administrative part of the government, is the Obama administration, the CDC, are they doing what needs to be done to protect Americans and to protect others from this disease? And Congress has the oversight responsibility for that. And so I think this is something that we need to pay attention to. Sure, we need to pay attention to cancer. We need to pay attention to Lyme, but this is not an either-or question. It's not like these kinds of issues should be resolved by news cycles. That's not the issue at all. The issue is this important, and should the American public and should the American people be protected? I think we should.
Michael, shouldn't we also be looking at the fact that a North Carolina-based Christian mission organization, actually a month before these infections of the Americans were publicized, they went before Congress, they talked to different people in the administration, they asked for help, they pleaded for it, and yet it just sort of sat there at that point. Does that not lead to the fact that basically says this isn't that important unless, of course, somebody's dying right in front of you?
Well, I had a similar experience. I spent 2 hours at the Health and Human Services office a couple of years ago talking to them about Lyme, pleading with them, giving them evidence of how the CDC had mishandled the disease. They said they'd get back to me. They've never gotten back to me. So I understand the frustration of the Christian organization from North Carolina. I'm with them. I'm sympathetic with that. Friends of mine, my Facebook friends at least, are friends with these doctors that are sick. And so I think that we need to realize that while we can't be all things to all people, at least we ought to use the resources that we're using well. And a cumbersome, slow government is not the way. I don't think government's the solution. I just wish they'd get out of the way in so many cases and stop encumbering innovation by private medical researchers. The reason that drugs cost so much, for example, is the cost of drug testing compliance for government purposes drives the cost of drugs through the roof. And so if we would have government be more nimble, be more receptive to private innovation, I think crises like this could be solved by the private sector much more readily than they are being today.
I'm going to answer to that. Scottie Nell, hang on. I'm going to come to you in just a moment, but here is a chairperson for the African Union challenging the world community, basically, and I'm going to probably steal from one of your words here, to be more agile with the handling of Ebola. Listen up.
We need to react. The response time should be quicker, but the international community, especially WHO, should be more agile and come in quickly and assist much more vigorously.
All right, so Scottie Nell, I'm going to throw it to you right now. A cumbersome and slow government. I have a feeling that no matter what we're talking about, you're going to agree with that one.
Well, I am going to agree with that one, but at the same time, I'm going to go. Just this week, President Obama announced $37 billion in additional aid in different forms to Africa. So it seems like, the pot of gold that Obama has within his White House, he's about to send a big chunk to Africa. That's not too cumbersome. And that was easy for him to give with this crisis happening. But, I want to go back to one quick point. It's not that I don't believe that we shouldn't be paying attention to Ebola, and that's not important, and the CDC with their work with it. I agree with that. I just think that if we're going to call Congress out of their vacation, there's a lot of other things they need to be focused on rather than this particular crisis, because I don't think we're at crisis level yet. I think that we should step out. I agree with the doctor that we should step out and let the CDC be able to do their work and actually do the innovations. But I promise you, calling anybody back to DC never has solved problems, especially in something like this. If this is a true crisis, then it's boots on the ground. People are needed, not necessarily politicians.
Chancellor Farris, let me ask you real briefly. We have about a minute left here. Are we at a crisis situation here?
Well, if you're sick with it, yeah, you think it's a crisis. And, I guess unless it's in your own backyard, people don't think it's a crisis. This is a crisis for a number of people. I don't want to come into the United States. I don't want this to start infecting people with weak immune systems and other things. I think we need to be paying attention to it. Yeah, it's a crisis.
What's your opinion of having the 2 infected Americans on American soil?
Well, I think that we've got them quarantined. I want them here. I want them being given innovative treatment. I saw an article where people were complaining we're giving Americans these innovative treatments, but not others. Well, I think we should be giving them to Americans first and foremost, and if they're not approved for use, I mean, we can't give them to others on an innovative basis. That just proves my basic point is government's too slow, too unresponsive, and we need to get these kind of medicines out to as many people as possible, as quickly as possible.
Scottie Nell, 10 seconds, weigh in. They should be here or not?
You know what, if we're here and they're secure, they need to just, we need to find a cure for this, but this is not a crisis yet. Let's keep this under wraps. Crisis only promotes absolute pandemonium.
Okay.
Not for it.
I'm with you on that one here. We'll tamp down the panic. We'll do that every single day as much as we can. Michael Farris, Scottie Nell Hughes, a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us both.
Thank you.
All right, later on this hour, what makes a certain city tick? We'll find out more about that. Also right after the break. Syndicated talker Jerry Doyle takes to the mic as we go around the dial. That and much more coming up right here on MidPoint.